Better is a poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king, who will no more be admonished. For out of prison he cometh to reign, whereas also he that is born in his kingdom becometh poor. Considering King Charles in Great Britain and his great privilege, and he's often discussed on various forums, quite often in a negative way among Christians, of course. But I chanced upon a man who described him as a philosopher king, or the philosopher king, which is quite an accolade, because a philosopher king is originally the invention of Plato, the Greek philosopher, who had posited that there would be ruling the earth these philosopher kings who had a measure of wisdom. Of course, these men were not godly men, they were Greeks. But it's fitting that he should be called the philosopher king. And the people describing him as such were two gentlemen who have a podcast or a video channel, and they call themselves Sheldrake and Vernon. Um, Sheldrake and Vernon Dialogues, or the Sheldrake and Vernon Dialogues. And I became curious after I'd seen one of them praising the king. It was one of the first times I'd seen him so praised. And these are two gentlemen who have a sort of religious background, but they're that different kind of religiousness, or not really faithful the way that I would like to see it, and I think anybody who listens to me would like to see faith and not religion. But it's rather like that gentleman, Gavin Ashenden, of whom I was speaking recently, and who I regard with suspicion. Um, Scribes and Pharisees, those that go and study with them, they will make them 2 times the child of hell than they are themselves. This is the problem. These people, on the surface, they look fine, and you could hardly fault them. But the more closely you look, the more you begin to perceive the horror that lies within. That's the way the world is, I'm afraid. So why should we speak of horror? Well, speaking of the Queen's chaplain, I mean, he had the opportunity at a certain point to expose the wickedness of the BBC. He was being removed for reasons of unbelief, actually, when they decided to prevent him from reading from the Bible spontaneously. And he was persuaded to keep quiet about it for a morsel of bread and for a future hope. But when you think about it, what believer would do such a thing? I remember when I was reprimanded publicly in a church at one time, and it was a Brethren church, for daring to reach out to take the bread and the wine without having had the authority of their elders. At the end of the service, I complained bitterly and loudly, and not shouting, but certainly audibly, in the middle of the church. And the elder in question tried to persuade me that we should go into a side room and continue our discussion. But I said to him, no, this is important and it's good that everybody should hear it. And I do believe that. And that will be the case with the Queen's chaplain also getting shut down in the BBC. It would have been done at personal cost, of course, because he wouldn't have been able to go on to another high paid position, or perhaps his own employment would have been threatened. But you can't keep quiet about something like that if you're a believer. You have to cry out. Um, you have to expose it. It's not really a moral obligation. It's just, to me, an instinctive reaction that you would speak. The Lord is on your side if you're being silenced for reading from the Bible, but he didn't. He kept quiet about it for 2 or 3 years until it finally dawned on him that he explained. But he can't be so slow on the uptake. He must have known what was going on. He was just hoping for another crack, for another seat at the table. How could you do that? To me, it speaks of unbelief. And these people, they become dangerous because of their unbelief and because of the then authority that they can have in society, the way that they're viewed, the credentials that they might have. But they are really children of hell, as the Bible says. And so Sheldrake and Vernon, these are two very well recommended gentlemen. The older fellow is a fellow of Cambridge University and has been on many committees and boards and travelled around the world in various capacities. I think his level of specialization is in the field of biology, and he has many credentials, and also his companion, the other fellow, Vernon, is from the field of psychotherapy, and again, with university credentials and important positions and wonderful vocabulary. These are the people that quite often they will attend school in which they've been taught Greek and Latin, and so they know, they have great knowledge of these matters, and they become inveigled in the Theosophical Society and other such groups, like Eliot, the poet, and C.S. Lewis and people of that ilk. They're sort of false Christians, really. They're able to drink from the cup of knowledge by their great gifts of understanding, they believe. And they're given high positions. And they become just so subtly wicked, because all of the energy of these men ultimately is geared towards placing a question mark over the Godhead of Jesus Christ. Now, I don't know whether Ashendon is doing that. I have no reason to say it, but certainly these other two gentlemen are in that particular field, the Gnostic field. Because people are terrified, or the world is terrified, of Jesus Christ, and always has been. Because once it's established truly and accepted and spoken that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that he died and was resurrected, then all bets are off, really. Then you can no longer control the narrative. You can no longer insert yourself between the poor people, the uneducated masses, the unwashed, and the living God, and profit and feed on the people. You can no longer do that because these people are too clever. They've taken that position. And the way they take it is by chipping away at the absolute authority of Jesus Christ. That's how they do it. That's what the truth movement is all about. Not believing, chipping away at the authority of the Holy Bible in one way or another, and in many ways at the same time. And so again, in that way, you see power passes back into the hands of men, and these men then can benefit, they can surf on the confusion that they create, and they become the shakers and movers and the philosophers of our modern society because of their wealth and position and the places that they're invited to speak and the people who will listen to them. And they get a following. So I did listen to one of the Sheldrake and Vernon dialogues, and it's not easy listening, in my opinion. I mean, it's all very good and very interesting, but it's clear that we are in the realm of disbelief. And Eastern philosophies are mentioned and brought in, as with the king, of course. That's why they want to call him the philosopher king, because he considers the Eastern philosophies. And the occult, of course, all of these things come in, are admitted into the temple, strange fire. There's no real belief. And I'm quite dispirited about the state of affairs. It could be because a week ago I decided to forego my piping activities, so I'm in nicotine withdrawal or smoking withdrawal, which hasn't helped my level of general tranquility, temporarily at least. And it could be because I've been wrestling with a customer who has simply been uncommunicative and dismissive of my work. And I've had to put my foot down, which will be probably to my own hurt. When you put your foot down, very often the first person to get squashed is yourself. That's the way it is with feet. But, the Bible seems to suggest that we should rejoice at our own defeat because it's an acceptable offering to the Lord. So, not that I'm claiming to be under any great duress. I mean, I live a very comfortable life. I have a warm house and plenty of food, and my health is somewhat good. But nonetheless, I'm often in anguish at the world, and I'm not the only one. We're surrounded by such apostasy at every turn. There was a woman preaching and shouting in the north of England, making an absolute nuisance of herself, and shouting that it was against the law for men to try to remove her from wherever she was shouting. There were a couple of policemen involved. But she was the one, of course, who was breaking the law, the biblical law. It's not her job to go and preach in the cities of England. I just despair to see this kind of behavior. And as I despair to see our philosopher king and his abandonment, his absolutely arrogant abandonment of the King of Kings. So I just pray that the Lord will sustain us in these dark times and put everything to right, as it must surely be. And that's really all I have to say today. I just feel so overwhelmed by the wickedness that surrounds us all and the deception also. So we no longer know what is true and what is false. And I listened to a video by the fittest flat earther, who's had some quite interesting videos from time to time. And he had one of those videos where people say, you must be able to see that I'm an authentic voice. People accuse me of this and people accuse me of that, but I've always told only the truth, he claims. And perhaps he has, I don't know. And I went to check out his page and I noticed that he has his members area and his donations buttons. And so I just quoted that verse, buy the truth and sell it not. I think it's very important. I don't suppose he'll read it. It's not really directed at him, but somebody might notice it. There's no real respite wherever you turn. Everything is just winding in the wrong direction, it seems sometimes. And I think it has to probably wind in that direction in order to reach a point of fracture. I'm not sure. But so it is in these dark days. So people might have a listen to the Sheldon Vernon dialogues and see who those gentlemen are and what sort of subtle distractions they're going to peddle on their podcast. And maybe consider Gavin Ashenden and wonder why he, with such great knowledge and great understanding of the Bible, went on to become a Catholic, and why he didn't know where the verse, where no vision is, the people perish, which is in the 29th chapter of Proverbs. I think it might be verse 28. And he claimed it was an Old Testament prophet, but of course Solomon was no prophet. That wasn't his role. So the Queen's chaplain was wrong about that. That's perfectly understandable. I mean, I can hardly ever remember where things are in the Bible, but I've only been reading the Bible for probably 11 years, or maybe, 11 years, shall we say. Whereas, he's been reading the Bible since he was a child, presumably, and he's now younger than me, but not very much. And I think people who read the Bible, difficult to say genuine people, but somebody, when there's real faith and humility, people tend to learn the Bible really well. It was an oral tradition in the olden days. People would memorize long passages of Scripture. And I don't think they would make a mistake as to place a proverb in the lips of the prophets, although the prophets can quote a proverb, and I did double check that, but there's nothing really that justifies his claim. Where no vision is, the people do perish. Well, this is what we're lacking at the moment, isn't it? We are lacking vision. And as believers, we do have vision, but it's very difficult somehow to share it because it gets co-opted in all sorts of different directions. God bless today now.